Hello everyone, I'm Julia. Do you know how President Zelenskyy became president? So this time I would like to tell you about President Zelenskyy. Around 1,000 years ago, in the 9th century, the region was settled by Slavs with Kiev as its capital. The most legendary figure in Ukraine was Volodymyr the Great, who ruled the region from 980 to 1015. Vladimir in Russian, Volodymyr in Ukrainian. These are the names of the presidents of Ukraine and Russia, who are currently fighting to the death. Ukraine is mainly divided into eastern and western parts, with the eastern and southern parts being pro-Russian and the western and central parts being pro-European. And President Zelenskyy is a Jewish Ukrainian from eastern Ukraine. During the World War II, when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, Jews were persecuted and some of them lived in Ukraine, and President Zelenskyy is a descendant of those persecuted Jews. President Zelenskyy only spoke Russian because he was from eastern Ukraine, but he learnt Ukrainian in earnest after becoming president. So it is said that President Zelenskyy is a man who understands the feelings of Russians and understands the feelings of people of Jewish descent. Furthermore, he is said to have been a very talkative man and an excellent public speaker even as a child. He entered the faculty of law at the Kiev State University of Economics, but later became a comedian. Even as a comedian he spoke Russian and became popular on the Russian TV program KVN. He then created a film and television production company called Kvartal 95, Kvartal means quarter. In 2006, he did a remake of a British dance show in Ukraine, which received ratings of over 80% and made him even more popular and successful as a comedian. He also became very popular in his own company's political comedy drama, Servant of the People. Zelenskyy starred in the drama, which told the story of a man who was a history teacher and one day became president. And as president, he gets into all sorts of trouble, including collusion and corruption. But when he, a history teacher, thinks of what a great man of the past would have done, the great man suddenly appears and gives him advice, defeats the corrupt politicians, overcomes his difficulties and becomes the ideal president. The reason why the show became so popular was that Ukrainian politics was actually riddled with corruption. And it was revealed that successive presidents and politicians had been cozying up to big conglomerates and had accumulated private wealth. And then there was a public outcry that it would really be nice if Zelenskyy was the president. And the people supported him. So in 2018 Zelenskyy's production company Kvartal 95 created a political party. In 2014, there was the annexation of Crimea, which led to the recognition of the Crimean Peninsula in the Black Sea as belonging to Russia, which led to a trend among the Ukrainian people to get rid of Russian culture. Then Ukrainian President Poroshenko adopted a policy of banning the use of Russian social networking services, Russian films and television, and eliminating direct flights from Russia. Some of these policies were supported, but Zelenskyy argued that it was understandable to have trouble with Russia, but it would be foolish to deny Russian culture as well. In fact, there was a Russian program in which Zelenskyy appeared as a comedian, and that program was on the air in Ukraine. And that program was also banned in Ukraine, so Zelenskyy rejected that policy. He then created a political party with the same name as the drama, called Servant of the People. And Zelenskyy ran a campaign that was completely different from the political campaigns that politicians had run before. What do you think he did? He campaigned through the internet, including YouTube, as if he was performing a continuation of the drama of the Servant of the People. In other words, he played the role of the drama in real life and ran for election. This became very popular among young people and the working class. There were 44 candidates in the presidential election at that time, but Zelenskyy won the first place in the first round of voting. Second place went to President Poroshenko. And because you have to win a majority to become president, it was a decisive vote between Zelenskyy, who came first, and President Poroshenko, who came second. President Poroshenko thought that Zelenskyy, a comedian, was not familiar with politics and offered him a debate. Mr. Zelenskyy, would you like to discuss policy? Poroshenko said. Usually debates are held in a small, intimate setting in a studio. Zelenskyy then suggested that a debate could be held, but in a stadium. President Poroshenko tried to attack policy in detail, but by holding the debate in the stadium, it became more of a performance confrontation than a debate. At the stadium, Poroshenko argued his policies in detail, but Zelensky's storytelling performance won him the hearts of the people. And he won a huge percentage of the vote to become the 6th president of the country. The people's wishes were entrusted to President Zelenskyy. President Poroshenko was anti-Russian, but the president before him was pro-Russian. And Ukrainian people who were tired of the anti-Russian camp hoped that President Zelenskyy could normalize relations with Russia. However, President Zelenskyy changed his mindset, which had been disputed by previous presidents as neo-Russian or anti-Russian, and focused on confronting corruption. In other words, President Zelenskyy was neutral towards Russia. The Ukrainian people expected President Zelenskyy to be neutral towards Russia and to eliminate corruption among Ukrainian politicians. However, President Zelenskyy ran into major problems. That problem was the existence of the nascent oligarch conglomerate. During the Soviet era, the state practiced a kind of managed economy because of communism. In other words, companies were told to do as the state dictated. However, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, Russia and Ukraine moved to a market-based economy without state control. The oligarch conglomerates became powerful in this market-based economy. And this oligarch conglomerate had an overwhelming influence on politics. And the oligarch conglomerate was involved in the Ukrainian economy, and corruption was widespread. For example, they would make you wealthy and you were told to play politics in favor of the conglomerates. Subsequently, corruption was gradually exposed, as it was revealed that successive presidents had amassed private wealth and lived in mansions after leaving office. Zelenskyy tried to fight this kind of corruption, but the oligarchs, an emerging conglomerate, held the media and other television interests in Ukraine. Zelenskyy became popular as a comedian when he started working for a TV station owned by oligarchs, and the public began to suspect that he had been doing bad things through collusion. Zelenskyy tried to change the electoral law to separate the conglomerate from the media and to prevent people with ties to oligarchs from contesting elections, but this legal change was rejected. It doesn't work like a drama. Even the president could not change the law if in fact big power and money are involved. There was a wall between reflecting the will of the people and controlling the country's politics, and it took a high degree of political power to achieve both. And it is said that President Zelenskyy did not have political power, as he did not coordinate well with Russia. This led to a decline in support for the Zelenskyy regime. And when it was said that what would happen to President Zelenskyy, Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence revealed that Russia's aim was to take President Zelenskyy and his family into custody and replace them with a pro-Russian figure as head of Ukraine. President Zelenskyy was then approached by the US side to help him if he would defect. In response to the US advice, which came rapidly on Ukraine, as if to cover up the US president's second son's alleged corruption over Ukraine, President Zelenskyy said he would not run away, but instead give me weapons to fight with. However, it was subsequently reported in the media that Zelenskyy had fled in order to undermine the popular will of the Ukrainian people. In response to these reports, Zelenskyy put out a video on the internet saying, "I am here, I am in Ukraine." In fact, in the past, when there were demonstrations in Ukraine about whether to side with Russia or Europe, President Yanukovych was one of the first to flee and defect to Russia. However, President Zelenskyy won the hearts and minds of the people again when he posted a video on the internet saying that he was not running away. President Zelenskyy lacked political power, but he was good at winning the support of the people. What will happen to Ukraine in the future? I hope that the situation will soon calm down.